Today we're going to start with our reading resources. So, on our last live stream, we finished our listening resources. Today we're going to do reading, and on our next, we're going to do speaking. All right? So, today for the reading resources, I'm mainly going to talk to you guys about graded books because graded books are fantastic. Since they're graded, obviously you need to know your level first, okay? So before you actually pick up a book or go onto a graded books website, you want to figure out what your level is. So A1, A2, we've got beginner level English, B1, B2, intermediate, C1, C2, obviously advanced, right? So you want to figure out where you are on the CFR scale. And then from there, you can actually find books to read at any level. And yes, you can find books to read at beginner levels of English. Many people think they can't, but you actually can. All right. So that's the cool thing about it. There are also obviously many different ways in which you can read, right? So I'm not going to talk about them in lots of detail today, but you can subscribe to newsletters, for example. You can read articles, whether they're online, if you read magazines, for instance, if you read the news. There's so many different things that you can actually do to simply be reading on a day-to-day basis, right? So it doesn't actually have to be picking up an actual book or a novel in order to read in English. You can read in many different ways nowadays, so that is fantastic. Now, the thing is that reading is um, an underrated skill in the English language. Not because obviously many people think, oh, well, I can read English and that's enough. But reading actually helps with many different things. And one of the most important things it helps with, obviously, your reading fluency, but your speaking. What did I just say? Your speaking fluency. It helps your reading comprehension and your speaking fluency. That's what I wanted to say. Okay, so if when we read, you're not just looking at, well, lots of grammar, lots of vocabulary, obviously you've got lots of punctuation, but we're also exploring how the English is used in storytelling, all right? Or if it's nonfiction, how it is used in those aspects, all right? So basically teaches you how English is used in real life. And that's basically what we want. We want to draw that grammar and vocab out of our books and start seeing how it's used in other senses, right? So we do that through reading and listening. So since today's live stream is about reading, let's get into it. Now, what I'm going to talk to you guys about today specifically are graded books, all right? Because many people don't know they exist, and I feel like it's quite an important thing for learners to know that you've actually got graded books out there. So, graded books are basically books at each level that you can read. So, if you are at an A1 level of English, so you're just getting started, you can still read some books, all right? And then the same goes for A2, B1, B2, C1, and honestly, C2. If you've got a C2 level of English, you can read anything you want. You do not need a graded books website for that, okay? Now, there are many different websites that you can actually go on in order to figure out which books you're interested in. Now, there are things that you do need to keep in consideration. Today, I'm going to talk to you guys about 30 books for each level, of course. And we're going to start with beginner level English. But I'm also going to show you websites that you can use to figure things out other than those 30 books, right? So let me show you the websites first because I think that's quite an important tool that you should have. So the first website I'm going to talk to you guys about is Oxford Bookworms. All right. They also have a reading club if you're interested in subscribing, but Bookworms, Oxford Bookworms is a free website where you can basically figure out if the book is at your level or not. The good thing about these graded books website, there are many of them, by the way, so if you just simply type it on Google, you're going to find lots of them. But the good thing about these websites is that you can get books in their categories. So if you're interested in mystery, you'll find something for you. If you're interested in drama, comedy, fiction, nonfiction, whatever it is you're interested in, you can actually filter them by their categories. And that way you can see, okay, well, I really like thriller books, for example. You're going to go into that section, you're going to find the books that are adequate to your level. All right. Now, can you read a book that is not at your level? You obviously can read books that are lower than your level. That doesn't need to actually be said. But what about books that are higher? Now, there's this thing about reading books that are dealing with content in general that is a little bit higher than your level. Ideally, you should take content that you at least understand 80% of, and that 20% that's left is where you get feedback, where you learn, where the progress is, right? But if the book is too hard for you, let's say, for example, you're at a B1 level and you pick up a C1 level book, then it's going to be too complex for you. Obviously, you can try reading it, right? If you're super determined, you can try reading it. But the problem is that you're probably going to sit there with a dictionary every 2, 3 words and figuring out grammatical structures, figuring out many different things. So the way you're going to advance in the book is going to be a lot slower than if you actually pick up a book that is at your level. All right. So that is just um, it's fair to note that yes, you can read books that are higher than your level, but they're going to take way lots more effort than reading books that are at your level that will also help you. Okay, so ideally, you should go step by step unless it's necessary, mainly because we don't want reading to be a daunting activity. We don't want you to pick up a book and say, oh my gosh, now I have to read these pages in English. And we don't want these negative feelings associated to the activity, mainly because the second you find a good enough excuse to get rid of it, you will. And you're never going to come back. And you're just going to remain, well, the thought of English as a daunting activity is basically what's going to remain in your head. So it's not going to be super motivating for you to actually come back and keep learning. Okay? So we want to find things that align with our goals and also align with our preferences, our hobbies, our likes. Right? So remember to keep that in consideration, especially if you are at an intermediate or advanced level of English. That's where you have more freedom, let's say. So choose books that are in the genres you're genuinely interested in. Otherwise, well, you might get bored and you might leave the book aside altogether, which is what we don't want. Okay? The same goes for movies, the same goes for many different types of resources. Always find something that is somewhat appealing to you so that you can learn with it. Now, obviously, I'm talking about learning in a more passive way, right? So if you pick up a book, it should be something enjoyable for you. If you watch a movie in English, it should be enjoyable. If you're listening to a podcast, same thing, right? You're not necessarily doing them as study sessions. They're things that you're doing that, let's say, they can form part of your passive activities that do not necessarily form part of your actual study routine. Okay. Sometimes our study routines have activities where we need to concentrate more, let's say, more engaging activities. You actually have to sit there and focus on them. Sometimes we have more passive activities. So these fall under the passive ones. Now remember that when you're reading, you can take it as far as you want to take it. So some people like to read a book and they basically start reading. They're going to look up all the words in the dictionary. They might even keep note of some of the words, phrases, expressions, anything they want to keep note of so that they can remember to go back to it later. Or you can read passively, trying to understand what is happening in the book, looking into the plot. So there are different levels of approach. Okay. You need to find the level that is obviously more adequate for you, according to your levels and according to how serious you are about learning the language and obviously the effort that you want to put in. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now, remember that when you're reading, you're obviously going to come across words that you do not know. Make sure you look them up And when you do look them up, make sure that you check out their pronunciation. Okay? Because it is very easy to invent a pronunciation of a word that is sitting right in front of you, but if you've been studying English for long enough, you know that our spelling does not correspond to our pronunciation most of the time, right? So, needless to actually talk more about this, check the pronunciation of your words so that you don't invent something that might be wrong and keep repeating it. The problem is to keep repeating it. Every time that word shows up, you're going to go back and repeat, let's say, let's say mispronounce it. And if you keep mispronouncing it for a significant amount of time, it's going to stick. And we don't want that because if you actually make a mistake and you want to reverse it, it's going to take a lot longer than just simply Googling it and figuring out what the pronunciation is like. All right. So it's better to prevent the mistakes than actually have to deal with them later along the road. Just do yourself that favor because many people fall into that trap. Let's call it a trap. All right. So that's the first thing. Now, there are two ways in which we read. Well, actually, there are many ways in which we read, but this depends on you again and what you are, if there's actually an outcome, specific outcome you're looking for when it comes to reading. Now, first things first, many of us open a book and we just start reading silently. Okay, that's the most common way to do it, just simply reading. All right. And that's the way we read in many different situations, like, for example, on a bus or somewhere that is public. Now, I do advise you, especially if you are genuine about learning English, to dedicate a little bit of that reading to reading out loud, right? So if you're going to read a whole chapter, read a couple of pages out loud. They don't have to be right after each other, just one page and then another, whatever it is that works for you. If you're just going to read, let's say 2 pages, read 1 or 2 paragraphs out loud. Get in the habit of reading out loud. It obviously is harder, but it will improve your speech. This is where fluency comes in, right? Because you're exposed to lots of grammatical structures, you're exposed to lots of vocabulary. So, what we want to make sure of is that you can actually say those things in sentences and hear yourself saying them so that your brain says, ah, that's how you use this in a sentence. Now I can use it too when I'm speaking. All right? If you don't show your brain how things are used, you're not really going to find it very easy to use them when you're actually having a conversation with someone. Okay, so exposure is necessary because of that. When we read out loud, you're basically practicing your pronunciation, you're practicing how to say sentences. We're not looking at individual words anymore. You're practicing how to connect your speech. You're practicing many different things that will help you. All right, and this is why if you have any doubts about the pronunciation, you go check it before you keep going. All right, that's very important. So we want to try to read out loud every now and then. Doesn't have to be every single time, but make sure that it is part of your routine in some way or another. It is definitely very helpful. Okay. And obviously, more advanced or, well, upper intermediate advanced levels of English, you're going, especially if you're prepping for exams, you're going to want to develop certain skills like skim reading, for example, summarizing. There are many scanning also. Skim reading and scanning aren't the same thing. So if you are looking into developing one of those specific skills, then you can also practice those skills when you've got a book. All right. So if you do have a specific goal in mind, we can take that goal and try to apply it there. If you don't have a specific goal in mind, you're just reading for pleasure, you're reading to gain a little bit of vocab or something along those lines, then obviously you can go ahead and do it that way, right? So remember to figure that out before you get started because there are so many things that can benefit you. But the most important thing is to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Okay? So that's thing number one. Thing number one. That's point number one. All right. Now, I was talking to you guys about Oxford Bookworms, which is a website. It's a graded book website. And let me show you the website because it's actually quite interesting. So all you need to do is basically go onto that website and we're going to filter things so that we can say, okay, well, I want to read Harry Potter, for example. Am I at that level, or do I need to improve my English a little bit before I can actually get there? That's basically what we're looking for with graded books. So in order to do that, in order to use these websites, you have to have a clear idea of your level. Okay, so that is very important. Before picking up a book, you want to know where you're at with your English, and then you can pick up the book. Okay, so let me show you Oxford Bookworms. This is the landing page that we've got here. Okay, you can see an Oxford Bookworms library, and well, you go down a little bit. You've obviously got the ISBN list over here, and if you keep going a little bit, let's scroll down, you get the scales that we're looking for. So we've got these stages over here, and if you see, let's say an intermediate um, stage of English, all right? So you can see all of the book titles that you've got over here, all right? And the same goes B2, B2 to C1, and so on. So you can see that you've got tons of books here. And let's click on something. The Big Sleep, for example. You're going to get a description, obviously the information that you need about the book, the word count, and so on. And the important part is the CEFR scale. So we can see that this book is at a B1, B2 level of English. So if you're somewhere in that transition, then you can pick this book up, right? And it is relevant if you're also prepping for exams. So this is how you would use this website, right? To check if the books that you want to read are actually at your level or not, okay? And it's an important thing to do before you go ahead and buy the book and then realize that you can't actually get through it because it's too complicated and have to set it aside. So it's always a nice idea to check, just double check on these websites and see if you actually are at that level or not before you buy the book, okay? So it will basically save you a little bit of time and maybe some disappointment. Now, there's another website that I'm also going to recommend before I get into this, and it's specifically the website of the Penguin editorial. Now, they've got a section called Penguin Readers, okay? And am I sharing my screen? Of course, I'm not sharing my screen. Now I'm sharing my screen. All right, so we've got graded ELT readers, right? And over here, you can see that you can choose the level, okay? And you can also choose a category, classic, contemporary, or nonfiction. So if you are keen on figuring out, looking for something specific, for instance, you can go ahead and check that out, okay? Let's say over here, okay, we've got Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. That's a very common one. We can see that it's at a level 3. And when you actually go inside, we've got a little description and we've got the page count. You already saw that we've got the CEFR level down here. All right. So this is basically what you need to do in order to figure out whether a book is at your level or not. All right. And it's ideal to figure these things out before you actually go ahead and buy the book. Now, let's say, for instance, I'm going to give you an example now. This is a personal one. When I was a kid and I used to go to a British international school, we had a reading scheme. We had a timetable that went through the whole academic year, and every single day you'd have to get a book or several out of the library and basically read them, return them next day, and so on. So we read graded books too, because when you're at a lower level of English, you're going to have to read specific books that help you with a couple of certain things, right? At your level, things that are understandable, and they also help you learn a little bit more. And then you keep progressing. And then you go up onto the B1, B2 levels where you've got a wider range of books. Things are more interesting. You can choose the genres that you're interested in. You might even have a favorite author at that point. And obviously going up into advanced level, that's where you've got many more options, right? So you can see that even at school, we always do this graded reading until we're good enough to read more content. So you can do that too on your journey. You just need one of these websites to tell you where this book is at on that scale. All right. So that's the first thing that you need to figure out. Now, these tools are obviously for you to use. Now, I'm going to talk to you guys about a series of books at each level. Let's say a starting place for you to actually get something right now. Now, at an A1 level of English, you do not have enough English to be picking and choosing what you actually want to read and what you would enjoy. But there are some classics that pretty much every English speaker has read, um, that we all go back to, and they fall under the A1 category. So I'm going to give you 5 classic stories that are very, very nice at that level. Now, if you've got kids, by the way, fantastic for them. Now, the first one was actually one of my favorites. I remember loving that book when I was a kid. It's The Very Hungry Caterpillar. All right, it's quite an old book from 1969, and there is obviously writing and illustration. So be prepared for all the illustration and colors there. And it's basically a short story about a caterpillar. It it's a caterpillar that eats anything that's in its way, all right? And it grows larger and larger and larger until it becomes a butterfly. And it's a very easy story. There's nothing super fancy about it, but it is great to learn essential vocabulary related to everyday things like your meals, your daily actions. These are the kinds of things that you would expect to get out of this book. All right. So that is what you'd learn, and this is a classic read. It's a very short story, by the way. They're only 22 pages. So you can go ahead and read that if you like them. Um, so along those lines, you can also read the Dr. Seuss books. If you like them, you can go ahead and check those out too. They are a little bit longer though. They're around 60-ish pages, I think. Now, another book that is nice to read at an A1 level is Hello Harvest Moon. All right. Now, that book is very nice because of its vocabulary glossary. Now, you've got many simple phrases. You practice your grammar in action, which is basically your, let's say, present simple. You've got a little bit of past simple. So you are reinforcing your grammar just simply by reading this book. And this is what we actually want to do when we're reading, right? Notice grammatical structures. Notice when we use a preposition and not another one. Notice when we use a phrasal verb. Notice when we use the word the and when we remove the word the. So there are specific things. The more observant you are, the better your English is going to get. All right. So remember that when you're reading a book, even though you might be doing it passively, you're not necessarily taking notes or highlighting or doing any of those things. It's very, very beneficial because the more you see these structures, the more you see vocabulary, the repetition that's getting in there is basically what's going to help you internalize how the language functions. All right, because it's one thing to study grammar and vocabulary from a textbook or from a course or something along those lines. It's a completely different thing to actually use it in real life. All right, many people stay in that theoretical phase, but they don't drag those things into their application. And reading is a nice way, reading and listening. There are nice ways to actually see all that grammar and the vocabulary that you've been learning in action in situations where they belong. And that's what will help you improve your speech and your writing. All right. So we need input. We are always going to need input in order to have a nice, decent output. So make sure that you've got that input. Okay. Reading and listening are fantastic for that. Now, um, what was I talking to you guys about? All right, let me tell you another story. Jack and the Beanstalk is a super famous story. I believe it actually exists in many languages. Um, right? Yeah. Okay. It is a very short one, by the way. This one's around what, 12, 15 pages long. It's not a big deal. And it's a very short story about a boy named Jack. And he tries to help his mother in the field. Okay. But they've got some difficulties, economical difficulties, and that leads them to sell their only cow. So they have a cow and they have to sell that cow. And in when they sell that cow, the boy did not actually receive money for the cow. He got beans. All right, that's where the beanstalk comes in. But those beans have some magic inside them. All right, I'm not going to spoil the story for you, but that's kind of where it goes. And you can see that in this story, we've got different things happening. We've got difficulties arising. We've got, well, trading things, the communication between people. Then we've got, well, the rest of the story, which I'm not going to talk to you guys about. But you can start to see how we're going into plot, right? We're going into storytelling. It's actually a very entertaining read. It's a nice, enjoyable book to read. So that's one of the books that I actually like because you can explore different things with this book and also get your grammar and vocab reinforcement there. Jack and the Beanstalk. Okay, that's what it's called in English. Now, there's another book called The Little Prince, which is also nice. It's actually written by a French author, but there is an English version of that book. And the good thing about that book, The Little Prince, is that we've got simple sentences, simple sentence structures, and we're going to start learning how to express ourselves. Okay, so it helps you to start figuring out, okay, how do we express ourselves? How do we express likes? How do we express dislikes? How do we express basically your opinion and your thoughts and so on, which is an essential part in our English language, right? Well, in any language, expressing yourself is super important. So this allows you to start expressing yourself at an initial stage, the initial level of the language. Obviously, it's not super complicated, right? We're talking about A1 level books here. So they're super, super easy. Now, the thing about this book is that it's a little bit longer than the previous ones I talked to you guys about. It's around 90 something pages long. All right. So, so that's basically what we're looking into. Now, those are the 5 or maybe 6 books. I can't remember how many I talked about. Those are the books that I would recommend at an A1 level of English. That's the easiest of all. All right. The Catcher in the Rye is a good one. Yes, it is. I don't remember if it's actually on the list, but it is definitely for a higher level. So let's move into A2 level books. So this is still beginner level, but before intermediate, basically, a little bit harder than our A1 level books. Now, that is where Charlie and the Chocolate Factory falls in. All right. You start reading books by Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl is an author that I absolutely loved as a kid. The stories that he has are super creative, the plots, and they're very, very entertaining to read. So I personally love them. You can give them a try at some point. Now, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is written by Roald Dahl, and I suppose that many of you already know what this story talks about. Now, the good thing about it is that we've got simple grammatical language in action here, so it's appropriate for anyone at a beginner level because of that, because grammatically speaking, it is quite understandable, all right? Plus, you've got a very intriguing story with many different situations, and it's quite fun to actually read, right? Now, the thing about this book is that we're starting to look at longer books, right? It's around 200 plus pages long, okay? And if you do like the way Roald Dahl tells his stories, I definitely recommend looking into more stories written by Roald Dahl because they're amazing. So this is another story. This is another classic from Roald Dahl. Jim and the Giant Peach is another story. Same author, okay? Um, oh, from Canada. Hi there. So, this story is about an orphan boy, all right, who finds a giant peach, and within him, he meets grasshoppers and different characters, like critters, for example, basically characters that can talk. And the story is about traveling to places. So it's a little bit of, let's say, we're going into adventure with new companions. So he's basically taking us on his journey, and it's quite nice to explore these things. So you're actually going to see how we take English, and we talk about journeys. We talk about, well, the interactions are very different there. It's a nice read. It is shorter than the first one, though. It is around 160 pages long. It's a little bit shorter than Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but it's quite a nice read. Never read that book still. Yeah, the movie's nice. The movie's nice. Another one at an A2 level that we've got. Flashing you guys with Roald Dahl books here. Is Matilda. Pretty sure many of you have actually heard about Matilda. Um, so this book is around the same page count, 150-ish, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And it's also written by Roald Dahl, okay? And this book basically talks about a very smart girl, okay? Now, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but the thing is that books that are written by Roald Dahl have a very interesting approach to them. The language, the storytelling, the engagement. And in terms of learning English, you learn so much from these books. I'm not just talking about the story itself and obviously the fact that it's entertaining, but the fact that you can actually see English happening in a natural sense, in communication, to describe things. There are so many things that you can learn from these, and obviously the grammar reinforcement is fantastic. Now, the okay, another book I'm going to throw at you. Now, this one is not by Roald Dahl. I can't remember what the book, my favorite Roald Dahl book was called. I remember it was about a fox. Anyways, there's another book called The Secret Garden that you can also read at this level. It is a classic of children's literature, though. All right, pretty much like all of them. And here you learn many of the basic rules of the English grammar. All right, so this is where you can see that little by little we're actually expanding our horizons a little bit when it comes to our level of English. Okay, now this book is it's quite cool because it's direct, it's summarized, it's not super lengthy, and you also learn typical idioms while you immerse yourself in that fantasy world that we've got. All right, so we're starting to introduce different elements of the language at this level. And that is important because once you jump into intermediate level English, you're going to need lots of vocabulary reinforcement in many different ways. We start learning tons of phrasal verbs, tons of collocations. You already have started learning them, hopefully, at beginner levels, but you're going to see yourself bombarded by lots of different types of vocabulary, different categories. So getting into them, immersing yourself in them little by little with these books will make that transition a lot smoother. Okay. Remember that when we go up into intermediate level English, that's what we call independent English. And that means that you should have, let's say, enough English language in order to be able to understand many different situations, right? You're independent, basically. You don't have to either introduce yourself or talk about the weather anymore or talk about the things that you like and dislike at a very basic level. You are basically opening the door into real life English. So that transition takes a little bit of time because we need to feed lots of vocab into our vocabulary bank. needless to say, some grammar too. So books are a fantastic way to actually get engaged in that sense. Now, have you guys heard about the Adventures of Tom Sawyer? Amazing. All right. Those are definitely enjoyable books that you can read. They're full of humor and also suspense. Okay, so now we're starting to actually explore some genres there. And and honestly, it's a book that I would recommend to anyone who is at a beginner level of English. It should not be missing. It's quite good, right? Now, let's look into books that are at an intermediate level of English. So we're going to start with B1 and we're going to take it up from there. Okay, they're going to gradually get harder. Paper Towns is the first book I'm going to throw at you guys. Paper Towns is quite a decent book to read at a B1 level of English. All right. And you start to, well, here you're introduced to the dynamics of the English language. It's easy to understand, so that's the good thing about it. And we've got lots of compound words showing up. So again, we're exploring different types of vocabulary, right? And those compound words will basically help you understand the plot, the mysterious plot that we've got with this book, all right? Now, remember, though, that Paper Towns is written by an American author. That means that you're going to be dealing with simple American expressions and American spelling, all right, which is obviously different from our British spelling, and some differences with the expressions and obviously our use of language. But remember that we've got these differences, okay? So if you see something that doesn't look like something that you've learned before, that could be the difference. Now we're looking into longer books. This is over 300 pages, okay? So it's a little bit longer than the ones that we talked about before. The good thing about a B1 level of English is that you can finally start exploring the dynamics of stories in general. Now, it's not as much about, okay, well, learning a little bit about routine, learning vocabulary and grammatical structures. You're actually going to start getting immersed in the plot. Um, if you're reading things that are either, let's say, for example, fall under the categories of suspense or mystery or maybe a thriller, something along those lines, you will also be exposed to, well, gathering hints, tiny hints, a little bit like a puzzle, and putting the pieces together. So you can also do that work as a reader. Now, at this level, you can finally start, let's say, finding reading enjoyable, right? Because there's something for everyone at an intermediate level. That's the good thing about it. So find something that suits you, and obviously, um, well, the more engaging the book is, the better. Now, there is another book at a B1 level that is quite interesting to read. It's called Mortal Instruments. Well, specifically the City of Bones. Okay. Um, Now, that specific book it's quite an interesting book, honestly. It is, it makes, let's say, it's a very good book in order to develop your fluency when it comes to reading. So you're going to be exposed to lots of action and fantasy, all right? So those are the two genres that we're exploring with this book. And when it comes to your reading comprehension, obviously, as the books get a little bit harder, you're going to build your grammar foundation and you're also going to build your vocabulary foundation. All right, so they go hand in hand. Now, the important thing is that when you actually start getting exposed to these kinds of things, we want to be able to make sense of them. So if you can't make sense of grammar, maybe it's time to take a break and look into that grammar, make sense of it, because the higher you go in the English language, the narrower, I know this is going to sound very absurd, but the narrower things get, even though you're actually exposed to a wider range of things. So let's say, for example, our C1 grammar and C2 grammar Many of those grammatical structures are used for specific purposes in specific situations, right? So they're not used widely, they're not used all the time, but the higher you go, the more of these structures you're going to find. And it's not something that you should worry about right now to B1 level, but it is something that you're going to build up to. So the more you make sense of the grammar that you're reading, the better. Mainly because when we make sense of things, especially now we've got context, we've got situations, we've got a story, we've got characters, we've got many things going on, you can actually look at the situation as a reader and say, okay, well, this is what's happening here, and this is the language that is used to describe the situation. This is the association that we're looking for. All right. So these are the kinds of associations that I want you to keep practicing when it comes to vocabulary and grammar, making sense of them. If I want to describe, for example, a situation in which I'm frustrated about my work, what kind of language would I use? So we want to figure these things out and make these subtle connections, right? You can obviously do it more passively or a little bit more actively, depends on how you are actually reading your books. But this is the process, right, that we go through. The good thing about reading is that the most common things are going to scream at you, basically. They're going to come up once and again and again and again and again. They're going to be there endlessly. So the important grammatical structures that you really need to know, they're going to be there, and I'm pretty sure you're going to see them several times over the course of that book. Same goes for vocabulary. So you're never going to find yourself doubting whether this is really important to actually learn or not. If it comes many times in many different situations, you know that it's one of the common things that we use in the English language. And obviously, it's worth learning, right? It's worth putting in a little bit of time when it comes to those. Now, other books that can be good reads at a B1 level of English is Ready Player One. Don't know if you guys know that, but it's also a movie. But there's a novel to that movie. Okay. Now, obviously, when it comes to reading, now this is an interesting book because it recounts a world set in the year 2045. All right, so we're looking into the future. Um, and the protagonist basically lives a super exciting adventure in a world full of technology, virtual reality, and stuff like that. So if you like those kinds of topics, it's a nice read at that level. All right. The good thing about it is that even though we're exploring these kinds of topics, it's very simply written. It's not overly complicated. The language is not scary, let's say. And it has a medium level of English, which is basically what you need. The good thing about it is that we've got very modern English with modern terms. So it's not something that dates back from our last century. It is something that is more modern. I think it was published 2018-ish, 19, somewhere around there, basically. So you can see that the English is not very dated. It's not like reading Shakespeare, for example. Okay. This book is longer though. It's around 570, 580 pages long, so you can see that the length of the books is actually stretching here. Divergent is also a very good book to read at this level. Published in 2011 though. It is a trilogy, by the way. If you guys like trilogies and series, look into those. It is a trilogy and it's mainly aimed at an audience of young adults. Okay, we're looking at adventure, we're looking at science fiction. It is nice to keep practicing your language though, but the problem is that it has an interesting way of expression, right? So its lively expressiveness is quite a catch. Might make things a little bit difficult. Okay, so it's, let's say if you just jumped into the B1 level of English, this is not the first book I would pick up. All right. Now, it is quite cool nonetheless, obviously, if you are interested in those genres. And now you can see that I'm just going to keep repeating this over the rest of the live stream. Look for the genres that you're interested in. I personally do not like, for example, science fiction, fantasy. I'm not really into those as much. I could read those kinds of books, but they're not the kinds of books that will actually keep me super motivated to keep reading them, right? So look for something that you are genuinely interested in, right? And that's what we want to start with, at least start with. If you are a person who reads a lot, go ahead and open your horizons and read a little bit of everything. That's perfectly fine. But if you struggle with the habit of reading from the first place, or you're just starting, I would definitely recommend picking books that appeal to you in some sense. All right? So we want we want that. Okay. Now, last book I'll recommend at this level is The Seventh Son. It's a little bit older, around 18, not 18, that's very old, 1987-ish. It's a little bit older than the previous books that we've seen. So, but it's quite simple. All right, it's a short. Well, it's not very short. It's around 300 pages long. Between 250 and 300, I think that's where that book falls. But anyways, it's simple and it's full of adventure. So we've got a world of magic, a little bit of evil shadow creatures, and basically we're looking into how the protagonist is going to stop the evilness in that world. Okay, so the thing about this book is that although it is an easy read, it does require a decent B1 level of English in order to understand the grammatical expressions it uses. And now we're looking into grammar itself. Grammar here is what might complicate the book a little bit, not as much as the vocab, right? So it might be simple, but grammar can be a bit of an obstacle with this book. This is why it's the last one I'm recommending at this level. So when you're building up your B1 level English, this is a book that I would look into, let's say, when you've got either a solid B1 or you're in the transition to B2. Okay? So remember, though, that the more exposed you are, the easier you are going to find these things. So if you are naturally exposed at this level, let's say you're listening to things in English, you might be watching things in English, you're basically doing many different things, not just reading in English, you will find these things a lot easier to consume. Okay, so that is worth saying. It varies a lot from person to person, and it varies specifically depending on how you are learning the language. That's the most important thing. Because if you're only learning it through your course book, or if you only go to class and you don't do anything else, if you don't live in an English speaking country, you're not exposed to English naturally, you're going to have to take responsibility of that exposure. Okay? So you can basically figure out ways in which you can have some kind of English happening in your day to day, on a day to day basis, right? So that's basically what we're looking for here. The more exposed you are, the better, because you're getting feedback all the time, okay? And all of that input is going to seep into your output too, all right? Especially through repetition. You're not going to magically use an expression you just read or listened to when you speak, okay? Especially if you have just seen it and you have never actually seen it ever again or before that, okay? So it is important to note that through repetition, it gets easier for these things to actually find their place in your speech, but the whole point is repetition. If you are keen on using something specific, let's say you're watching a movie and you heard this expression or a phrasal verb or something along those lines that you're interested in using in your own speech, I do recommend running a quick speaking activity right after your listening or your reading activities. It goes for both. Okay, so if you read a chapter of a book or if you watched an episode of a series in English, and there you come across interesting vocab, interesting grammar that you want to incorporate, what I would do is take 2 to 5 minutes afterwards and just talk about it. Try to use some of the vocab that you came across, obviously, some of the grammatical structures or anything that you've got in mind, right? But talk about it. You can summarize what you've read or what you've watched. You can express your opinion. You can talk about a specific character and their development or how you hate that character. That's perfectly fine too. Just find something to talk about. And from there, you're practicing speaking with your listening or reading. Okay, it's very important to practice speaking in order to become fluent. Yeah, you're not going to get fluent magically. Okay, so if you do want to get fluent at English, you need to be practicing speaking. So, a nice way to do it is if you're reading, if you're watching something, if you're naturally consuming content, then we just tag a small speaking activity afterwards. And you've got your speaking and your listening or reading done together, which is fantastic. Okay. So, I definitely do recommend pairing these kinds of exercises, right? Doesn't have to be super long, but you can make them as short or as long as you want them to. Now, at a B2 level of English, that is when we can start reading Harry Potter. Many people have asked me this question before. B2 is the level, okay? Now, Harry Potter is quite a nice read, okay? Unfortunately, you do need to get to this level in order to start picking this book up. And you know, as you probably, well, maybe you don't know, but Harry Potter's books, they actually start quite short and they just get longer and longer. All right. Now, if you guys have watched the movies, you obviously know what it's about already, and you can see that we're exploring many different things when it comes to Harry Potter. The plot is complicated, the characters, everything that's happening, many very interesting descriptions are going on there. There is so much that you can learn from these books. But obviously, we need a B2 level, nice solid B2 in order to start picking those books up. Otherwise, it will just look insane. Okay, so it's basically a nice challenge, let's say, to deepen your language a little bit, especially if you like these genres, right? But it's a very decent book to pick up at this level. You can also pick up The Hobbit at this level, An Unexpected Journey. Is that what it's called? Yeah, I think so. If you're into these kinds of things, the fantasy genres, um, let's say for example Lord of the Rings too. So those are the kinds of books that you can start picking up at a B2 level. Now, some people will find them a little bit harder than others. The Hobbit specifically is not an easy read. Okay, I'm warning you before you get started. It requires a little more level so that you're not struggling so much while you read this book, okay? Because it has lots of extensive description passages, it's got lots of deep speeches, lots of implicit stuff that you're going to have to figure out in order to figure everything out and to make sense of the whole world that's in that book. You're going to need a decent enough level to get there. So you can pick this book up at a B2 level of English, but it can be a little bit challenging for some people according to how much exposure you've been getting and how far into the B2 level you actually are. So let's say that it's not one of the easy B2 level books that you would pick up, but it's definitely a good one. Okay, so it's not a very easy book to read. That's basically what we're drawing from it in the end. Now, it is a little bit short though. It's around what, 200 something, around 300. I think it's a little bit less than 300, but it's around 300 pages. Okay. Now, how about my mouse is not working? Okay, that's not nice. Anyways, how about some historical stuff? Personally, I'm not into history. I don't really like historical novels, but this is a good read at a B2 level in the literary genre. All right. So, Memoirs of Geisha. It's basically set at the beginning of the Second World War, and this is why we're dating back. It is quite cool though because it is versatile and it is captivating. All right, so we will actually keep you reading. Now it's about the path of a girl to freedom. Okay, so it's a little bit, let's say we've got more controversial topics going into this book, and well, we've got many different things that we're exploring here. So if you do like these kind this genre, this is a nice book to pick up. It is around 500 something pages long. It is not a short one. Okay. And something, let's look at another genre. There's so many genres. I'm not going to be able to cover them all for you guys. That's why you've got Oxford Bookworms, okay? But something, let's say, for example, science fiction. There are science fiction novels that you can read at a B2 level. Let's look at something post-apocalyptic, just because. Post-apocalyptic, you can actually read the book called The Road. Quite a decent book to read. So, well, yeah, it's a decent book if you're into that. If you're into that genre, okay. We're looking at the story of a father and his son trying to survive that devastating apocalyptic world, and the fact is that their ties grow. So we're looking into lots of character development. We're looking into lots of basically human behavior and connections, right? So that's basically where we're looking into, obviously, and everything else that's happening outside. So what we're starting to explore at this level are two different phases, or well, I don't really know how to word this properly, but we're looking into external events and we're also looking into internal events, right? So psychology starts to play a role here. Our communication, the way that we act, the way that we behave, our friendships with people, dynamics, right? So communication and dynamics, social dynamics is basically what we're starting to look into. We've got that aspect, and we've obviously got everything else that's happening plot wise in the book. We've got basically how they merge together, which is where things, let's say, they start to get really interesting. Good thing about it is that it's an easy to read novel. Okay, so it's around 200 pages long. It's really not very long. Actually, one of the short books that I'd say that you can pick up at a B2 level of English. But obviously, you have to kind of be into that kind of stuff before you pick that book up, right? Now, the last book I'm going to recommend at a B2 level of English, obviously there are many more, and that's why you want to use Oxford Bookworms or maybe the Penguin's Readers, just to see if those books that you're into actually fall into those levels or not. But these are the classics, let's say. Okay, Maids and Ladies. It's a historical drama. Uh, it dates back to the 60s, and it basically talks about a girl from Mississippi, right? So you can actually see where this novel is from and the kind of language that you're going to be exposed to. Remember, British American. If you actually pick up an Australian book, it will also be different, by the way. But they're very. If you're at this level, it's nice to start exposing yourself to different types of English too, right? Just simply for the sake of your comprehension, right? So understand how Americans express themselves. If you have been studying British English all the time, understand how Australians express themselves, because there are so many variations when it comes to different ways English is used in these dialects, and we've got different accents and whatnot. But what's really interesting is that expression changes from one type to another. The way you'd express yourself in British English is different from the way you'd express yourself in American English. Obviously, some things overlap, but there are differences. So these differences are nice to explore when you're at a B2 level of English, obviously B2 leaning, well, B2 and higher, okay? So I definitely recommend being exposed to a wider variety of content at this level, because you're at a good enough level to start understanding these things and not actually find them incredibly challenging to pick up. Okay, that is just a small piece of advice for you. The more exposed you are, the better. I'm not just talking about English, but also non-native English speakers speaking English. Because many people all over the world have different accents, even though they're speaking the same language. And it's wise to understand how they use this language too, right? So again, we're building our comprehension, but that goes more into listening than reading. So let me go back to what I was talking about. Okay, maids and ladies. So this girl was from where was she from? Mississippi. Basically, what happens to her is that she begins to see her social life and her social environment with different eyes. Okay, so we're looking at internal shifts here, and um, and also we're looking at certain stereotypes with this book. So the story is it's quite an interesting book. It does belong to a dramatic genre though. So if you are interested in these in that genre, then it's a nice book to pick up, right? But remember though that here you're going to find idioms and vocabulary that is related to the south of the USA. All right, so that's basically where those expressions are contracted. Okay, and it is around 450 pages long, pretty much. Those are the books that I'll basically recommend at a B2 level. Those are the classics, places where you can get started. If you're not interested in these genres, go ahead and look for something that you are interested in. Remember that how appealing a book is to you, well, maybe not on a very superficial level, but when it comes to reading and listening, you're going to be a lot more engaged when you're actually interested in the language. Okay, so that's something that's very, very important for you to remember because if you're not interested, you're probably going to leave it aside and you might leave English practicing aside altogether. That's not what we want. Okay, so find something that's nice and interesting for you. Because naturally, if you're interested about something, you're going to want to learn more about it. Whether it's a book that you're interested in or simply something, a hobby, if you play an instrument, if you are, for example, an athlete or a musician, whatever you are, an artist. So if you've got certain interests, certain hobbies, you're going to naturally want to know more about those topics. So go ahead and dive deep in those topics and try doing that in English. Because English obviously will make things a little bit harder, right? But it won't be it won't look so scary. Let's just say it won't be so hard to deal with the English when you're actually interested in it. You'll be so much more keen on learning in order to get the information that you want to get than dealing with content that you're not interested in. Okay, so this is always the starting place. Obviously, when you feel like you're already immersed in the language, you've got lots of exposure, you've got lots of things going on in English in your life, feel free to widen your horizons a little bit, right? And so we're going to dive into many different topics, whether you like them. Maybe there are topics that you don't like that much. That's perfectly fine. We obviously want a little bit of everything. But a nice starting place, if you don't have a routine down yet, for example, is to start with something that means something to you, okay? It could be something that you're interested in, even if, for example, you need English for work, that is also something that means something to you because you've got some kind of motivation, you've got an interest. So where you've got an interest, that's where we start because it's going to help us keep pushing through the hard times, all right? And eventually it does get a lot easier. You just need to get through the first stage, which is, let's say, the least fun one. It's getting the habits down. All right, that's where we slack a lot. Now, at a C1 level of English, and that's the last level I'm going to talk to you guys about, because again, if you're at a C2 level of English, you can pick up whatever you want. Trust me. Some things will be a little bit harder, some things will be a little bit easier. You've got a dictionary, you're really not going to struggle too much. I can guarantee that. But a C1 level of English, you've obviously got very wide range of things that you can read at this level. One of the classics that we've got at C1 is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, right? So it's a historical novel, right? It's narrated in the 18th century, right? At the time of the French Revolution. So here we've got advanced vocabulary, we've got detailed vocabulary, things that are tightly associated to the events of that time. Okay, so it's basically it's an essential work when it comes to advanced level English. It's very interesting to read, but it's not an easy read, let's say, because not just are we dealing with advanced level vocabulary, we're dealing with advanced level vocabulary that dates back to the 18th century. All right, so that is a little bit yeah, so it just makes things a bit harder, let's say. All right, it's around 500 something pages long, so it's a little bit, you can see that we are um, getting a little bit higher. Well, some Harry Potter books are a lot longer as a matter. Anyways, this is a book that you will find on Oxford Bookworms ELT if you want to look into it, okay? Now, there's another fantastic read that I totally would recommend at an advanced level of English in The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Now, you do need a C1 level of English, unfortunately, in order to start reading these books. Okay, I'm talking about the entire collection. No, we've got all of these adventures of Sherlock Holmes. They're very detailed. And honestly, they're very, very entertaining to read. Okay, so it allows for something comfortable, but you have to be ready to be faced with this complex grammar that these books carry. All right, so they're not easy, but they're going to definitely keep you captivated. At a C1 level of English, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to get through this book without too many problems. But I would definitely not recommend this book for someone transitioning from B2 to C1. Not right away. Just settle into C1 first. Okay, because it does deal with lots of complex grammatical structures. And the good thing about these books is that they're really short stories, right? So they're short stories about these adventures that Sherlock Holmes goes on, and you can literally read a story in one sitting, right? And then you can read another one some other day, and so on. So that's what I personally like about it. Because when you get books with very lengthy chapters, sometimes, at least me, I find myself struggling to figure out where to stop in order to not forget what I read and actually progress the next day or whenever I pick it up again. So you won't have that problem with Sherlock Holmes. Now, if you're into more fantasy, let's say you can read The Red Queen. Now, this is dated a little bit forward, around 2015, I think it was published. So it's a fantasy novel, but we're looking into the Victorian environment. Okay. Now, we're looking at a story where characters are governed by more than just their decisions. Okay, so it's, let's say, for example, their blood defines their identity in society. We've got status, and we've got some kind of hierarchy going on there. We've got a very detailed prose plot. Okay. The good thing about it is that the transition between chapters is quite fluent, and it's quite fluid and it's quite easy. So it's but as you can see, it deals with very, let's say, very specific topics and very detailed part, very detailed book to read. So this is the reason why I'd only recommend this book to advanced level learners. It is not an easy book to understand if you're not at a C1 level of English, and I'd find that many people will struggle with this book because of the language that is used there. All right. So unless you're at a C1 level, would not pick up this book. Okay. Another book that I read it a long time ago, and I remember that I actually liked this book quite a lot. was the book Lost. Um, Lost basically talks about the disappearance of a kid called, sorry, not the kid, it's actually his wife. Yeah, the disappearance of a wife. And the fact is that there was something very, very suspicious going on there, and we're looking at a very suspicious crime that has been committed. All right. So we're looking into detective, investigation, crime, all of these kinds of topics. So if you actually like that kind of stuff, fantastic read. All right, if you don't really like that stuff, I'll maybe steer away from this book. The thing is that we have got a great variety of verb tenses. Okay, so we're going back to our grammar foundation. You're going to reinforce that grammar foundation very well with this book because since we're dealing with so many events and you've actually got the disappearance of this person and we are going back from this event to what might have happened before, investigating the crime, right, the cause of the crime. So we've got tenses that basically draw you back, like the past perfect, differences with the present perfect, all of these kinds of differences that many people might struggle with at this level. Many people tend to struggle with them. If you haven't practiced them enough, and you can actually get a nice foundation with this book. The good thing about it is that it flows very nicely. It's very, very entertaining to read. The prose is quite cool. And well, obviously, it's a mystery novel. Needless to say, it's a mystery novel. I did like this book quite a lot. And if you do like this book, you do read it and do like this book, there's also another book called Gone Girl that you can read. Similar prose. It's around 400 pages long, by the way, so it's not super lengthy, let's say. Now, the last book I'm going to recommend at this level, as in one of the classics, is The Diary of Anne Frank. All right, so it's dated back, actually, it's dated back quite some time, 1947. Yeah. All right. Anyways, so it's basically an edition of personal diaries written by a Jewish girl. All right. So we've got these diaries, and you can see now we're looking at first person. All right, with this book, we've got first person. The perspective, the POV, what we call it nowadays, is obviously different. We're going to get lots of insight from this first person. So what I want you to pay lots of attention to is how she expresses her thoughts and feelings. Because this is what makes C1 also very complicated. The way that you express yourself. We've got so many different options, but we can express ourselves very, very specifically. Sometimes we express ourselves a little bit vaguely, and we do that because we want to, but there are some occasions in which we want to be a lot more specific about our thoughts or feelings or opinions or whatever you are expressing. And these are the kinds of things that you can pick up from books because you've got situations, you've got context. You can read a whole paragraph, a whole chapter, and you say, okay, this is what is happening here. And you can see all of the vocab and grammar that is incorporated in order to express that. Right? So this is basically what I want you to pick up when you're reading. What do we use when and how it's being used? Okay? So it's basically I already told you about the book. Anyways, it was basically about the personal diaries of that girl. Okay, I mean in that time period, I think it was yeah, it was some it was talking about the duration during the World War II. During World War II, it was yeah. So she recounts her story as a teenager, though. Now, it's interesting also to see how things vary when we get different age groups in movies and books, right? But you can see how younger people express themselves. You can see how teenagers express themselves, how adults express themselves. So we're basically going up, and believe it or not, our English changes a little bit from one age group to another, and changes obviously according to your preference, according to your knowledge of the language, according to your experiences, and many different things, right? So what I want you to also pay attention to is that evolution, right, of the English language. Now, the thing is that the good thing about nowadays actually is that it's very easy to be exposed to the English language. We've all got internet, social media, all of these things. I mean, if you can see me, you probably can access lots of content, right? So we've all got these resources out there, and you can actually see so many people using the English language to talk about their lives, to talk about their experiences, to talk about things that they're doing, to teach you things, whatever it is, and basically gain lots of knowledge online nowadays. So it makes exposure a lot easier than it was a while back, right? So use it to your advantage, basically. If you've got clear goals with the English language, I'm learning English for work, I'm learning English because I have an English exam coming up. I'm learning English because I travel a lot. I'm learning English because I'm moving to a different country. If you have a specific goal, then obviously you would want to be a little bit selective with the content that you are dealing with or you're exposing yourself with so that you can gain as much benefit as you can going in the direction you want to go. Okay, so that's something that is worth saying. Before doing anything in general with a language, you want to figure out, well, if you've already been learning it for a while, figure out where you are, what level you're at, and figure out if you've got any objectives. Because if you do, it is important to keep them in mind. If you don't, and you're a little, let's say you're a little bit more lenient, things are going to be more flexible and you can expose yourself to lots more content. But having a clear goal will help you figure out what the next step to take is. All right, so what should I learn next? And that is probably not something you're going to be asking yourself at a beginner level of English. But when you start getting into intermediate, especially B2 C1 transition, that is where many people get lost because their English goes up and then it starts to kind of like get stagnant, goes into a plateau at the end. Because people don't know what to learn anymore. They don't know how to move from B2 to C1. It's a complex transition. So if you've got clear goals, those goals will help you tell you, hey, this is the next step to take. Let's learn more phrasal verbs. Let's work on our fluency. Let's work on our listening skills because our comprehension is not that good. You'll basically know what to do, right? So that's why we always want to stop at some point in our journey, reflect on our learning strategies, reflect on the resources we're using, reflect on everything basically related to that language, and see if it's taking you where you want to go or not. Okay? And the good thing about reading is that you can do it super passively. You can just pick up a book and read it, enjoy it, and move on. Um, and you'll obviously be exposed to lots of grammar. You're going to be exposed to lots of vocabulary that you're going to retain through repetition. Or you can use them in a more, let's say, more constructive form. Actually taking a couple of notes. Maybe you like highlighting your books or marking them, whatever you want to do. Or maybe you can have a separate notebook to write things down that you are interested in learning or using. So use the content that you have according to how you want to actually be learning the language and how serious you are about advancing, progressing, right? So there is one last thing I do want to leave you guys with. It's a website that I used back many years ago. Pretty sure it got a lot better now. And it's this website where you can basically get your email and you can get newsletters. Okay, the good thing about this website, hear me out on this, is that you will only get newsletters for a determined amount of days, and usually they're 10 days. All right, so it's like enrolling in a course, a mini course, where you're going to get an email every day for 10 days about that topic that you chose. And they've got so many different topics, right? If you like animals, you can get that too. We've got so many different topics, animals, technology, whatever you want, is everything is on there, right? Now, the good thing about it is that you can basically go in, you're not going to get spammed by it. You're not going to get endless newsletters that you might feel overwhelmed to read. They're just going to be 10 days in your inbox. You have a 5-minute read for each day. So if you don't like picking up books and reading in that way, you can still read newsletters, you can still read articles, you can still read things. The good thing about this website is that at least for the next 10 days, you don't have to think about what I am going to read. Okay? Now, in my opinion, as a teacher, I can tell you that one of the hardest things about sticking to our study routines is having to plan it in advance. Okay. You want to read on Mondays, for example. What do you read on Mondays? Unless you have a book, it's going to be a little bit complicated. Unless you have go-to resources, it's going to be a little bit complicated for you to figure it out. Or you're going to spend time figuring it out when you could be reading. So we want to eliminate that, right? We want to eliminate all that friction that goes into it. And that website is called Highbrow. All right. Let me show it to you. And this is the last resource that I'm going to show you guys today. So Highbrow, it's quite an interesting website. This is how we write it, by the way. Okay. You can browse the courses over here. So this is the landing page. Yeah, you can browse the courses and we've got all these topics. Okay. Now, if you're interested in psychology, there's something for you. Interested in health and fitness, interested in finance, productivity, whatever you want. Okay, so let's say science, for example. Ooh, okay. Well, if you basically go down and say, okay, well, I'm actually interested in the foundations of mathematics. This is just random, yeah? But you're going to see the duration. So you're going to get emails for 10 days. You're going to see the time that it's going to take you to read those newsletters. And usually all of them are pretty much the same, 10 days and 5 minutes. Okay. And they're always going to be one lesson delivered via email daily. And that's basically what you need to know. And if you like it, you can basically start the course, get your email in, and you get started right away, which is what I like about this website, right? But if you're not interested in this course or you find it boring, you can go ahead and sign up to something different, right? So that's basically what this whole website is about. And I find it quite nice to basically, let's say, to ease the process of reading a little bit, especially when you do not have a book, because a book is easier to stick to since you've got it somewhere in your house. But when you actually want to use different resources that are not necessarily books, or you don't have a magazine or something along those lines, you want to have these go-to resources that you can use, right? They can be newsletters like these ones, for instance. They can be online courses. And obviously, according to your interests, there are going to be so many different websites that you can use. All right, so let's say, for example, if you're into writing, if you're an author and you like writing, there are so many different websites that will basically send you emails or have these mini courses that are basically designed for you to learn about what you want to learn about. Okay, so remember that you can also go into those in more detail. But if you want a starting point, Highbrow is a nice starting point. Mainly because many people start wondering, okay, well, what kind of stuff should I read? Try reading something on that website. If you like it, go ahead and subscribe to more courses. It's free, by the way. If you don't like it, then you can find something else. The most important thing here on your English learning journey is to be open to trying different resources. You try different things and you say, you know what, I don't really like this. Don't do it. This works for me. I have a very tight schedule, for example. I work this many hours and I'm very exhausted by the end of the day. You're always going to find something that suits you, but you want to be open to trying different things. When you try different things, you say, okay, now I can pick and choose. This will suit me for now because I have a tight schedule. Maybe your schedule frees up a little bit 1 year later and you can incorporate more things, or vice versa. So remember that when you are actually crafting your study schedule, you need two sets of activities. Ones that are more deliberate, more structured. So ones that you're actually going to sit and concentrate on and get something out of. and other ones that are a little bit more passive, like watching a movie, listening to songs, listening to a podcast, listening to an audiobook while you go walk your dog, whatever it is. So they are basically more passive things that don't require too much of your energy, all right? They're a little bit more entertaining, and that's where you get lots more freedom. And you can learn so much from these resources, from movies, from books, from songs. Believe me, you can learn so much. But we want to find our preferences first. Okay, so when it comes to books, when it comes to movies, when it comes to songs, always go to your preferences. If you want to widen a little bit, test different things out, that's perfectly fine. But where do we start? We start with our preferences. Okay, because it's going to be appealing to us. It's going to be interesting. You're going to want to come back and keep learning or keep being exposed to the language. You don't even have to be concentrated. If you're washing the dishes, for example, or you're vacuuming your house, you might be doing chores, you might be running errands, whatever. If you have a podcast that you listen to, something that you like, that's also English exposure. Okay, so the more exposed you are to the English language, the better. The more tiny things you find that you can just seep into your day, the better. Okay, so it's better not just for your listening and reading comprehension, obviously, but also it also flows into your fluency. Just don't forget about your speaking, though. Speaking is what we're going to talk about on our next live stream. So I'm going to talk to you about exactly how to structure your speaking practice, where you can find people to talk to if you want to find people to talk to, and how you can practice English speaking on your own so that it is not an aimless practice session. Okay, so we're going to talk about speaking and how to develop your fluency on my next live stream. Anyways, I'll leave you with these reading resources here today. Obviously, there are many, many more out there, okay? But this is just a starting place for you to figure out what you like, what you don't like, if this works for you, if that doesn't, and you can basically start from there and start exploring. Because trust me, learning a language can be super fun if you actually use the right techniques and the right resources, okay? So let's try to make English a lot more fun than basically learning it from a textbook. And we start step by step, okay? I'll see you guys on my next live stream and I'll probably tune in next Tuesday around 1 o'clock Spanish time zone. See you then. Bye bye.